Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. Here's the president of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, John DeNuzzo.
Welcome to Lake George Battlefield Moments. Our guest is Amanda Vaill, author of Pride and Pleasure, The Schuyler Sisters in the Age of Revolution, and 3 other works of nonfiction. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you very much for having me here, John. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, we're tickled that you joined us. Your previous books were biographies of 20th century figures in the world of arts and literature. So what drew you to the 18th century and specifically to the Schuyler family?
Well, actually, although it was set in the late 1930s, my last book was also about war and politics, the rise of fascism and the Spanish Civil War. So Pride and Pleasure is a bit less of a jump than it may seem to be. Oddly, it was while I was working on that very book that I thought a biography should be written of the Schuyler Sisters. I've always been interested in the 18th century. I read histories and biographies of the period. I ran across them in, among other things, Ron Chermow's biography of Hamilton. So I thought, whoa, these are really interesting subjects. But I imagined them as a project for somebody else, since at the time I was busy with my other book. And then a few days later, I was looking for a new subject, and I saw Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical, before it opened on Broadway at the Public Theater in New York. And I was reminded at that time of how interesting these women had seemed to me. And I started researching their lives to see if there might be a book there. And I realized not only that there was, but that the story was so different and so much richer and more complicated, really, than what people had thought. Well, I was sold.
Okay, great. Well, Philip Schuyler and family are very big in these parts, as I'm sure you know, from Albany north to Lake George, Ticonderoga, etc. So we're very keen when something new is published on the Schuyler family. I suspect one of the things you found that surprised you as you dug into the story was the complexity of the relationship between Angelica and Eliza. I mean, they were certainly loving sisters, but how would you characterize the relationship between the two of them?
Well, they were, as you know, the 2 eldest daughters, and they were born a year apart. They were Philip Schuyler and Catherine Van Rensselaer Schuyler's 2 eldest daughters. And Schuyler, of course, is a very wealthy Albany landowner. He's a military man. Their sister, their next youngest sister, Margaretta or Peggy, was a year younger than Eliza. And so the 3 girls formed a kind of a threesome. But Angelica and Eliza really seemed always to have the stronger bond. It was like the 2 of them would kind of pair off against Peggy. Maybe this was because they looked very strikingly alike. Angelica told a friend that she and her sister Eliza might have been twins. He disputed that, but it tells you something that she thought so. And there were also 3 Schuyler brothers who were quite a bit younger than they were. And there were also 2 much younger sisters. But those kids they were like in a different generation in the family almost. So Angelica and Eliza are in this cluster, and they go off to school together in New York. They grew even closer once they married to real outsiders, both of them, because they moved away from Albany and traveled in what I guess I'd call more exotic circles than their family did. They were really in the room where it happened, even more than their father, who was, a senator and a general. But Eliza is married to a Treasury Secretary, and, they're really there. And of course, they were connected too by Angelica's attachment to Eliza's husband, which is a whole story in itself.
Okay, so start telling us a little bit, and I've read the book, so I know where you're going with this, but explain the complexity of the relationship between Alexander Hamilton and his sister-in-law, Angelica Schuyler Church.
Well, contrary to what Lin-Manuel Miranda shows us in Hamilton, Angelica was married and she had 2 small children when she met Eliza's new husband, Alexander Hamilton, the penniless, illegitimate guy from the West Indies. And I suspect that her first reaction on meeting him was jealousy that her little sister, who she was really used to kind of dominating, had snagged this guy. I mean, he might not have been rich. He clearly wasn't, but he was handsomer. He was smarter. He was more charming, and he was much more flirtatious than her own husband. And he was clearly on his way to glory, even in 1780 when she met him. So they began what was at first a kind of coquettish and then a more intense, I guess I would say, correspondence. She sent him by private courier to his office, not to his home, a miniature of herself. And that's this kind of thing that you would send a lover, not to your brother-in-law. You send a miniature to him, that says something. She says to Eliza, I love your husband very much, and if you were generous, you'd lend him to me for a little while. So you set against this the fact that Hamilton and Eliza had an unusually ardent marriage. You could see in their correspondence, his to her, and the things that she says to her sisters, the fact that she has a baby every 2 years, which tells you something biologically. Also, while Angelica tended to patronize Eliza still adores her big sister. She cries when she goes back to England in 1789. So what is going on here? How did the 3 of these people rationalize or reconcile whatever is going on? And I think one answer is that neither Eliza nor the Schuyler family nor Angelica's husband ever saw the correspondence between Angelica and Hamilton. You can deny what you just don't see. And Hamilton himself seems to have persuaded himself that Eliza kind of weirdly approved of his relationship with his sister. He wrote Angelica, Betsy consents to everything. Or even that in some way the 2 women were the same person. He also writes to Angelica, Eliza identifies with you. That tells you quite a lot.
Wow, there it is, complex. Getting away from the romance, Pride and Pleasure extensively quotes Eliza, Angelica, and many who touch their worlds. How did you go about researching the Schuyler sisters? I mean, were there many primary sources to draw upon, or did you mostly have to look at the secondary sources?
Well, as it turned out, and I did not know this when I started, there were tons of primary sources, but you just really have to look for them everywhere. In the end, I ended up using everything. There were boxes and boxes of letters, of diaries, financial and legal papers. Philip Schuyler's papers at the New York Public Library has, in household inventories and shipping manifests with all kinds of stuff that they had. So it's not just what people said to each other, it's what they owned and what they prized and bartered. I used memoirs of characters in the book and all the histories and biographies of them. There's a multi-volume biography of Philip Schuyler, for instance, written in the 19th century, which is really very valuable. There are all newspapers and pamphlets, which I used, current scholarship on the period to give me some perspective, like scholarly articles, histories, biographies. And in addition to all of this paper, I looked at objects, baby dresses, handkerchiefs, mourning rings, wedding rings, furniture, china. All this stuff is still around if you look for it. And I visited places, including the Schuyler Mansion in Albany, Hamilton Grange, which is here in New York City. And amazingly, I was able to get into Angelica's Thameside Villa down place, which at the time that I saw it was being converted into condos, and the developer took me to see it, which is just amazing. So everything was grist for the mill, really.
Wow. Well done. Great research. Another name with local connections.
It was fun.
Oh, yeah. History can be fun. So I see in your book and reading it, the name William Dewar pops up not insignificantly.
Yeah.
Now, he lived at Fort Miller, which isn't that far away from here in Washington County. he doesn't come across very positively.
Well, he's actually a really interesting guy, a transplanted Englishman with a West Indian connection. His father was a plantation owner down there, and he arrived in the colonies in the early 1770s, I think, and became a jurist, a developer, a financier. He did a little of everything, and he was one of these people who's really, really good at charming the people, the men, who could put him in the way of a good thing. And one of those men was Philip Schuyler, who helped him buy a huge amount of land around Fort Miller, which he turned into this gorgeous show place and a very, very lucrative money-making estate. Another of these guys was William Alexander, who was called Lord Stirling, who was one of Washington's generals. And Dewar married his daughter, Lady Kitty. Another of these guys is Alexander Hamilton, who hired him as assistant Treasury Secretary at the beginning of the first Washington administration. And to give him credit, during the Revolutionary War, Dewar warned Schuyler he shouldn't trust Benedict Arnold because Arnold, who he didn't like for quite good reason, would put himself ahead of the good of the country. He warns him, don't give this man a promotion, don't trust him. But of course, it takes one to know one. Because
right.
Dewar, when he was at the Treasury, Hamilton caught him insider trading. And he said to him, you have to go. You've got to resign. I can't have you here. And Dewar left. And he wrote a friend saying, I have left to do better.
Whoa.
Unfortunately, he got that part wrong, though, because his speculations all ended in bankruptcy. And you know what? He died in debtor's prison.
Yeah.
That's a cautionary tale.
Yes, it is. Well, again, the cast of characters in your book is fascinating. Now, I know you traveled to many sites. You mentioned the Schuyler Mansion in Albany and probably the Grange in Manhattan. Are there other sites that you'd recommend for our listeners and your book readers to visit?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's no substitute for being there. And so you can go to the Cralo in Rensselaer, New York, which is just across the Hudson from Albany. And this is a fortified manor house that was owned by Catherine Schuyler's family. And it is the site of the showdown that's in my book between the Schuylers and Angelica and her new husband, who she eloped with, this guy called John Carter. And after their elopement, she and her parents had this showdown at the grandparents' house, and it's quite a scene. That is a state historic site, and it has guided tours, and I think it's only open in the summertime, but it's well worth a visit. In Morristown, New Jersey, you can go to the house where Eliza stayed with her aunt and uncle in the winter of 1780 while Hamilton was courting her in the front parlor, and you can sit in the front parlor and just pretend that you're there. It's an adorable house. It's full of period furniture and it's docents, and it's run by the DAR, and the guides are very helpful. It's open all year round, but only on Sunday, I think. And there's obviously also Hamilton Grange in Manhattan, the Hamilton's dream house where they were living when Hamilton was killed in the duel with Burr. And that is a National Parks Service site, and it's open year round on I think Wednesday through Sunday, something like that. But the good thing about that is that they have some of the original furniture. They've been able to repatriate it, and things that are likely to have been in the house on the first floor. It's the only floor that's open for visitors. But you can visit it online, and it has a really great virtual tour, which I actually went back to constantly when I was writing the book, so I could be in the room where it happened. So I would advise people to just go HamiltonGrange.org or whatever it is, and Google it and go around, because it's wonderful. It's really
super. Okay, well, thank you. You've been quite a raconteur, Amanda, and we appreciate your insights. How can listeners stay current on what you're doing? Are you still making promotional appearances?
I still am, and indeed I'm doing something at Trinity Church next in 2 weeks, which is the place where actually all Angelica in a vault and Eliza and Hamilton are all buried at Trinity Churchyard. So I am giving a talk there in Lower Manhattan, and you can go on Trinity. I'm also going to be this summer, I will be at the Mount at Edith Wharton's old house in Lenox, Massachusetts, where I'm going to be doing 2 lectures in August 11th and 12th, I believe it is. Anyway, all this information is on my new, revamped, and beautiful website, for which I thank a wonderful man called Michael Borum of Etherweave in Boston. This is my shout out to him. And all my news is on there. And also on social media, Pride and Pleasure has its very own Facebook page, which is public. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and Threads and Blue Sky, and you can find me. So all my stuff is there. I try to keep current.
Excellent. And your website is, I didn't catch that. What is your website?
It's www.amandavaill.com.
Fabulously. Once again, the book is Pride and Pleasure, The Schuyler Sisters in an Age of Revolution. The author is Amanda Vaill, published by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. A great read. It really is, and available everywhere. Thank you, Amanda.
Well, thank you so much, John. It was lovely to be here, and I hope that people will enjoy the book.
Well, I hope you get to Lake George sometime. You'll let us know if you're going to do that.
I sure will.
Okay. Our website is lakegeorgebattlefield.org, and we thank you for being a part of our history.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more information or to check out the latest podcast, go to lakegeorgebattlefield.org and listen live on Saturday mornings to Lake George Battlefield Moments on 93.5 Lake FM.